She thought she could claim his driveway like it was hers, day after day, week after week, until one quiet man decided enough was enough. What started as petty entitlement spiraled into a battle of will, power, and respect. But she never expected him to fight back. And when he did, the entire neighborhood watched it all unravel. If you feel drawn in, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have a story that will leave you speechless. Reggie Carter lived a life of quiet rhythm and quiet dignity. A middle school science teacher in Lakeland, Florida, Reggie had learned the value of patience through years of managing distracted teenagers more interested in their phones than atoms and molecules. His voice rarely rose above calm, and his footsteps always followed routine. Home by 4:30, lesson plans by 6, the game on by 7. His modest brick home was his haven. The lawn was always trimmed, the porch swept, the driveway clear. It wasn't much, but it was his, a sanctuary where order and peace reigned. But peace, he would learn, could be invaded without a sound. At first, it was just a silver Lexus parked in his driveway one Wednesday afternoon. Reggie assumed it was a mistake. Maybe a neighbor had visitors and needed to shuffle some cars. He shrugged it off. These things happened. But when it happened again the next week, and again the week after that, he started to feel the edges of irritation creeping in. The car belonged to Blythe Vanderholt, the woman next door. She was always perfectly put together. Stylish clothes, hair in place, voice clipped and polite, in a way that felt more performative than kind. When Reggie knocked on her door to ask about the car, she answered with a feigned surprise and a tight-lipped smile. "Oh, I was just running something inside real quick," she said, flicking her hand like it was nothing. "You don't mind, do you?" He did, but he smiled anyway. Weeks passed. Each time the excuses changed. Delivery truck, no street parking, just a moment. Each time Reggie held back. He wasn't raised to be confrontational. He believed in being neighborly, in giving people the benefit of the doubt. But doubt only went so far when every day he came home to find her car taking up space where his should be. It wasn't just the inconvenience, it was the message. That his space didn't matter. That his comfort was second to hers. That somehow her need always took priority. "Still," Reggie asked politely. Still, she smiled like he was overreacting. There's a particular kind of frustration that builds when decency is mistaken for weakness. And as Blythe's car continued to appear in his driveway, Reggie began to feel that frustration grow. Not because of the space it took up, but because of what it took from him: respect, dignity, and peace. And eventually, even the most patient man runs out of room. Reggie Carter was not a man prone to anger. He had seen enough tempers in his classroom to know how useless they could be. Anger didn't solve problems, it only made them louder. So for weeks, even months, he had chosen calm, chosen civility. He had written notes, knocked on doors, held his voice steady even when his patience wore thin. But even the calmest water begins to churn when the wind refuses to rest. The evening it changed for Reggie was unremarkable in every way but one. He had just finished another long day at school. Lab cleanup, late papers, a surprise parent-teacher conference. All he wanted was his couch, a glass of iced tea, and the tail end of the Rays game. But as he turned the corner onto his street, that familiar irritation returned before he even pulled into the driveway. Her car was there again. Not just there, but sprawled across the center like she owned it, as if it were hers by right, not by grace. He parked down the street this time, sat in his car for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing. He could already hear her voice in his head, the casual dismissal, the smirk behind the wine glass, the same tired excuse dressed in different clothes. He imagined himself knocking again, asking again, being ignored again. And the thought of it made something in his chest sink. Reggie walked to his front door, but this time, he didn't stop at her porch. He didn't knock. He didn't leave another note she'd pretend she hadn't seen. Instead, he stepped inside, set his keys on the counter, and reached for his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, past coworkers, friends, his brother, and paused at a number he had saved 2 weeks earlier. Sunshine Towing. It was time. He dialed. "Sunshine Towing, how can we help you?" "Yes," Reggie said, voice steady, almost quiet. I need a car removed from my private driveway. It's not authorized. Same address as before. The dispatcher was quick. Is it blocking access to your home? Yes, ma'am. We'll be there in 20. As he hung up, Reggie didn't feel triumphant. He felt still, not angry, not smug, just certain. There's a weight that lifts when you finally decide enough is enough, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. When the tow truck arrived, it was almost poetic. The soft rumble of the engine broke the suburban stillness. A stocky driver in a navy jumpsuit stepped out and gave Reggie a respectful nod. She's in your driveway? Yes, the silver Lexus. Got proof of ownership? Reggie had come prepared. He handed over a copy of his property deed. The driver looked it over, nodded again, and got to work. Within minutes, Blythe's pristine SUV was up on the lift, its tires suspended above the pavement like a trophy of quiet rebellion. Reggie stood with his arms crossed on his porch, watching the car disappear down the street. He didn't gloat, he didn't grin, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe. It didn't take long for the storm to follow. About an hour later, as Reggie was grading papers on the couch, the peace was shattered by a furious pounding on his front door. Not a knock, a demand. He rose slowly, smoothed his shirt, took a sip of water, then opened the door. There she stood, Blythe Vanderholt in silk pajama pants and a fury that made her cheeks glow crimson. Her hair was slightly out of place, her phone gripped tight in one hand. "Where is my car?" she snapped. Reggie tilted his head. "You mean the one illegally parked in my driveway?" "Don't play games, Reggie. You had no right." "I had every right," he said calmly. "I asked, repeatedly. You ignored me." Her jaw tightened. "I'm on the HOA board. I have connections. You're going to regret this." Reggie gave her a long, level look. "Your car is at Sunshine Towing on Orange Blossom Trail. They'll be happy to release it once you pay the impound fee." And with that, he closed the door. Outside, she fumed, ranted, called the police. And when two officers finally showed up, she pointed toward Reggie's house like it was a crime scene. One of the officers knocked gently. "Sir, did you have a vehicle towed from your driveway?" "Yes." "Do you have proof you own the property?" Reggie handed him the deed again. The officer scanned it, nodded once, and turned back to Blythe. "Ma'am, he's within his rights." The look on her face, shock, outrage, disbelief, was almost cinematic. And still, Reggie said nothing more. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming his space, his time, his dignity, his peace. It wasn't just about a driveway. It was about the simple but powerful truth that some lines should never be crossed, and some men, however patient, do eventually stand their ground. Reggie had drawn his line, and for the first time Blythe realized she couldn't step over it. Blythe Vanderholt wasn't used to losing, and she certainly wasn't used to being publicly outmaneuvered by a quiet man who didn't raise his voice or stoop to name-calling. So when her beloved Lexus was hauled away not once, but in full view of the neighborhood, something inside her snapped. Not in heartbreak, but in indignation. She didn't see it as a consequence. She saw it as a declaration of war. And Blythe, she never lost a war. Or so she thought. The very next morning, Reggie found a note taped to his front door. It was written in bold red marker, the kind used on garage sale signs or PTA banners. It read, "This is a community. We should be considerate of our neighbors. Passive-aggressive behavior is not the answer." It wasn't signed, but Reggie didn't need Sherlock Holmes to know who wrote it. He chuckled as he peeled it off the door and tossed it in the trash. That might have been the end of it, if Blythe had any sense of restraint, but subtlety was not in her toolkit. 3 days later, Reggie received a letter from the HOA claiming that the potted ferns on his front porch were in violation of community aesthetic guidelines. The same ferns that had sat there, peacefully photosynthesizing, for 2 years. Then came another letter. His trash bins were left out too long on collection day. A third accused him of having chipped paint on his mailbox. Reggie actually went outside with a flashlight to check. The paint was fine, it was petty, it was transparent, but it was also kind of impressive. She was putting in real work. But the pièce de résistance came one mild Tuesday evening when Reggie was watering his front lawn. The sun was low, casting golden light across the grass. He had his favorite baseball cap on and a hose in hand when a white SUV marked Community Security rolled up, lights flashing as if he were brandishing a weapon. A tall man stepped out, adjusting his belt with the self-importance of someone who took his clipboard a little too seriously. "Sir, do you live here?" he asked, like he hadn't seen Reggie every week for the last 3 years. "I do," Reggie said, raising an eyebrow. "We received a report of suspicious activity." Reggie looked down at the hose in his hand, then at the grass, then back at the security guard. "You mean watering my lawn?" The officer looked momentarily embarrassed. Um, yes, sir." Reggie glanced to his left, and there she was, Blythe Vanderholt, arms crossed, standing on her porch, squinting like a hawk in designer sunglasses, pretending to be surprised, as if she had no idea why security had shown up. Reggie shook his head. "You can tell her to find a better hobby," he said, voice even. "Maybe knitting." The guard nodded awkwardly and backed away. That night, Reggie didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was pitiful. Blythe, once the queen bee of the HOA, had been reduced to passive-aggressive notes and false reports about landscaping crimes. But what she hadn't counted on was the neighborhood watching. Flyers began to appear the next week, professionally printed and laminated, taped to every mailbox on the street. Is this the kind of community we want? Do we tow our neighbors instead of talking to them? It was classic Blythe, cloaked in righteousness, but dripping in condescension. She wanted to make Reggie the villain, but the plan backfired in spectacular fashion. His phone started lighting up with messages. "Saw the flyer. What a joke. She fined me $100 for having a wind chime last summer. If she parks in your driveway again, I'll help pay the tow fee." Neighbors who had once kept quiet, out of politeness or fear of being targeted, were finally speaking up. Turns out Reggie wasn't the first person Blythe had tried to bully. He was just the first one who pushed back. She had alienated half the street with ridiculous fines, complaints about unsightly garden gnomes, and vendettas over barking dogs. Now her hypocrisy was on full display, and nobody was buying the act anymore. The community, once silent, had found its voice, and it wasn't speaking her language. The final nail came during the monthly HOA meeting. Reggie had never bothered attending before, but this time he walked in with quiet confidence, taking a seat directly across from Blythe at the community center. She avoided his gaze, lips pressed in a thin, bitter line. After the usual drone of budget updates and landscaping discussions, one board member cleared his throat and said, "We've received multiple complaints regarding misuse of HOA channels and retaliatory behavior." Blythe straightened up, clearly ready to present her case, likely framed as a heartfelt concern for community values. But then he added, "The complaints are about you, Blythe." Gasps were audible. She looked stunned. Her voice stammered as she tried to defend herself, but no one jumped to support her. Even her allies on the board shifted uncomfortably. "We're not choosing sides," said one elderly board member gently. "We're choosing what's best for the neighborhood." And in that moment it became clear. Blythe's influence had crumbled. The queen bee had lost her hive. The evening of the HOA meeting, the community center was more crowded than usual. A few folding chairs had to be pulled from the storage closet, and murmurs filled the room like the low hum before a thunderstorm. People who had once ignored these monthly gatherings now came early, taking seats with purpose, with stories, with quiet anticipation. Reggie Carter arrived a few minutes before the meeting began. He wore a navy-collared shirt and his usual calm expression. He didn't need to raise his voice or carry a file of complaints. He brought only himself, and it turned out that was more than enough. Across the room, Blythe Vanderholt sat poised in her usual seat at the HOA board table. She wore a pale pink blazer, pearls at her neck, and a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a look of someone clinging to control, still believing that performance could shield her from consequence. But tonight was different. The neighborhood had changed. The meeting began with routine matters, updates about community landscaping, recycling pickups, and a brief discussion about repainting the welcome sign. But the real reason for the crowd was waiting at the bottom of the agenda. When the chair finally reached it, the room quieted in an instant. "We need to address a formal complaint filed by multiple residents," he said, glancing at a printed sheet in his hands. "This concerns the misuse of HOA authority, retaliatory reports, and harassment directed at fellow community members." Blythe sat up straighter. She was ready, likely prepared to spin her version of events as concern for neighborhood harmony. Then came the name. "The complaint is directed at board member Blythe Vanderholt." The effect was electric. Gasps, heads turning. Some didn't even bother to hide their surprise or their satisfaction. Blythe's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to object, but the chair continued calmly. "We've reviewed several incidents," he said. "These include false complaints regarding landscaping violations, unauthorized use of HOA communication channels, and repeated unfounded calls to security regarding harmless resident activity." A woman on the board, likely in her late 60s, cleared her throat and added, "We've also received reports of intimidation, flyers distributed to mailboxes, misuse of influence, and targeting of individual residents after personal disagreements." Blythe shot to her feet. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "I have always acted in the best interest of this community." Reggie sat motionless, arms crossed, gaze steady. "You're taking his side?" she said, pointing toward him, her voice rising. "You're siding with someone who towed my car? Twice? Who's trying to humiliate me?" A man in the second row, Mr. Hargrove, who'd lived there for 2 decades, stood slowly. "No, Blythe," he said. "We're not taking sides. We're just tired." "Tired of what?" she demanded. "Tired of you," he said simply. "Tired of your fines for flower pots. Tired of your notes, your threats, your need to control everything. This isn't a neighborhood anymore. It's a kingdom, and we never elected a queen." A murmur of agreement followed. Even the people who usually stayed quiet nodded. For the first time, Blythe realized how alone she truly was. The chair glanced at his colleagues, then turned back to her. "In accordance with HOA bylaws, we're holding a vote tonight to determine whether your actions have breached the standards expected of board members. If found in violation, you will be removed from the board effective immediately." Blythe laughed nervously. "You can't be serious." "We're very serious," the older woman replied gently. "This has gone on long enough." They passed out ballots. One by one, the board members voted. When the final count came in, the room held its breath. "By unanimous decision," the chair said, "Blythe Vanderholt is hereby removed from the HOA board." There was no applause, no celebration, just silence, a silence heavy with truth and accountability. Blythe stood frozen for a moment, blinking as if trying to wake from a dream. Then slowly she gathered her purse and walked out. No eye contact, no parting words, just the soft click of her heels on tile as the door shut behind her. Reggie didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply leaned back in his chair, folded his hands in his lap, and exhaled. It was over. For years, Blythe had wielded her position like a weapon. She had fined people for wind chimes, garden gnomes, and kids playing too loudly. She'd turned the HOA into her personal tool of vengeance. But when Reggie stood up, not with anger, but with quiet resolve, he gave the neighborhood permission to do the same. Justice didn't arrive with drama. It came with calm, with ballots, with truth spoken plainly. And sometimes that's the most powerful justice of all. In the weeks that followed the HOA meeting, the neighborhood settled into a new kind of quiet. Not the uneasy kind that hovers after conflict, but the steady calm that arrives when tension has finally broken and the air clears. Blythe Vanderholt didn't speak to Reggie again. No glares, no notes, no sideways comments about trash cans or mailboxes. She avoided eye contact when they passed on the street. The Lexus no longer touched his driveway. And though she stayed in her house for a while longer, the community knew it was only a matter of time. Sure enough, a for sale sign appeared on her front lawn within 2 months. Speculation buzzed quietly. Some said it was the embarrassment. Others believed she'd simply lost too much face. Reggie didn't care why. He just watched the moving trucks come and go. Then one morning she was gone. And for the first time in a long time, Reggie stood on his porch with a coffee in hand, took a deep breath, and smiled. Not out of triumph, but out of peace. There were no more cars in his driveway, no more red marker notes, no more unexpected knocks at the door. Just the sound of sprinklers clicking on next door, birds rustling in the hedges, and the familiar rhythm of a neighborhood remembering how to be neighborly again. People started waving more. Conversations lasted longer. Some even stopped by to thank Reggie, not just for towing a car, but for drawing a line. One neighbor shared that Blythe once fined her son for leaving a skateboard near the curb. Another recalled being threatened over a hummingbird feeder. Reggie realized then it had never been just about him. He was simply the first one who didn't look the other way. That quiet act of standing up rippled further than he'd ever expected, and maybe that was the real victory. Not just the empty driveway or the absence of flyers and fines, but the fact that others found their voice because he had used his. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't sought revenge. He had chosen dignity over drama, strength over spectacle. And in the end, that made all the difference. Because sometimes the most powerful change begins with one person deciding that enough is enough and having the courage to reclaim their peace. In a world where quiet voices are often drowned out, stories like Reggie Carter's remind us that dignity, patience, and quiet courage still hold immense power. His journey wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was real. And in its simplicity, it became one of those emotional stories that stay with us long after the last word is spoken. Reggie didn't fight with fists or fury. He chose integrity. He chose stillness in the face of provocation. And through that choice, he sparked a movement, not just on his street, but in the hearts of everyone who's ever been underestimated, ignored, or pushed aside. This is more than just one of those narrated stories we listen to and forget. It's a call to action, a reminder that sometimes standing up for what's right begins with reclaiming a driveway, and that in doing so, we send waves of justice through the very communities that once stood still. To every Black man or woman who's been told to let it go, to everyone who's ever been quietly tested, know this: your story matters. Your calm strength can shift mountains. And when you speak, others find their voice too. If this touching story moved you, share it. Let others witness the power of resolve and respect. Because the world doesn't just need more noise, it needs more truth, more grace, and more incredible stories like this one. Here in the threads of unraveled fates, we find not just justice, but the courage to write our own ending.